Order, please rise for Mayor Michael Fougere.
Please be seated, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the December 14th meeting of special meeting of City Council. Could I have a motion to confirm the agenda?
So moved.
And with the alterations that we have?
Yep.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. A seconder, please. Councilor Young. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have a number of delegations. The first one is D 15-115, Jim Elliott. Mr. Elliott, if you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and members of council may have questions for you afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Jim Elliott, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here early in the agenda. Following such an important discussion that we had last week, otherwise known as the budget of Regina, this budget or this report, in my mind, is as important or perhaps even more important than the budget of Regina. I don't say this lightly, but from my very simple review of this document, the consequences of your actions tonight will bind the hands of our elected officials long into the future. I say this because of what is the crux of the matter. Does the growth in the footprint of this city by greenfield development both hamstring the city on what it can do now, but will it put this city on a path of unsustainability into the future? Now, my assessment, although going some distance towards it, does not put this city on a sustainable path. I do think that the administration is capable of dealing with this, as is many other cities across this country and perhaps the world. But what I see is that the developers have been able to engender the notion, and I would say the myth, that the provisions of the basic infrastructure of the subdivision, i.e. the roads, sewers, water pipes, parks, those types of things, are sufficient to make the expansion of the city's footprint sustainable in the long term. Now, the city administration has been able to push back on this myth and have the development industry pay more than what they did before, and through the development levies, put more money back into the city, but I think it is still not enough. It's been stated that having the infrastructure there does not allow the residents of those communities to maintain adequately their community. So what continues to be the case is that the built community, i.e. the current footprint of this city, continues to subsidize the growth of the city's footprint. And the monies meant to sustain that inner city is not available to maintain that inner city. And this, in my mind, is why we continue to have infrastructure deficits and why I would insert that we will never get to the point where we will be adequately sustaining this growth model that we live in today, or be in a position of not continuing to pay more taxes every year. And again, notwithstanding the fact that prices do go up. We can't continue to allow the 70% of new development to be built outside our current built city, and the amount of infill must be larger than 30% until such time as the current underutilized infrastructure is getting closer to capacity. We are still fundamentally supporting 1950s planning, and by virtue of arguing or agreeing to this outdated idea of development, we're simply perpetuating this unsustainability. This policy of funding greenfield developments and having the developer pay only a portion of the costs of those adds to the footprint and continues to externalize the additional costs onto the taxpayer. Now, another feature of this policy is the idea that if we work at this price up to 235,000 population, then when we embark with that 235,000 and first person, we can it will magically cost more money, and we can legitimately force the developer to pay more money. To my mind, this hasn't been adequately justified.
You have 1 minute left in your presentation.
Thank you. My objective here should be, or our objective here should be actually decreasing the demands for our infrastructure, to decrease the demand for the single occupancy automobile and the ever-expanding water delivery system. The development community is only willing to go so far in reducing the carbon footprint and lead to sustainability. So in conclusion, my recommendation should be that we build into this payment structure capacities to reduce their levy or fee if they reduce their overall demand and upon non-renewable resources and water, for instance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Right on time. Thank you for your presentation. Are there questions of the delegation? There are none. Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery. Next delegation is Wilma Staff, D15116. Wilma Staff here.
Your Worship, I'll move the communication.
Thank you. To receive and file.
Yes,
Seconder for that, please. Okay. Councillor Hawkins, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The third delegation, D15111, is Mr. Mark Geiger. Mr. Geiger, if you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for presentation time, and members of council may questions afterwards.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Mark Geiger. I am representing myself and my wife Rita. We own some of the property known as McCarthy North. This is the name given by city administration to describe the new neighborhood lands lying north of Lakeridge Addition and north of Skyview, northwest Regina. I thank city administration on the great deal of effort they put into the proposed phasing plan. Unfortunately, I disagree with the final recommendation that none of McCarthy North be included in Phase 1. In my opinion, waiting until Phase 2 to begin development is too long. A considerable amount of time and money have been spent on a detailed design. We are 90% complete. Hardly any more time would be needed for your administration to review. I am the only developer approved to develop in the interim phasing plan that is not allowed to develop in Phase 1, the only developer, not development area. I feel this is a little unfair, but I guess at the end of the day it is your city and you get to decide who develops and where development occurs. I disagree with administration's reasoning that by delaying McCarthy North will help other areas to build out that much quicker. I also disagree that by delaying McCarthy North, administration thinks the area will eventually build out quicker. I suggest letting the markets determine this. If there is any way to include some of the McCarthy lands in Phase 1, this would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Geiger. Are there questions of the delegation? Councillor Flagel.
Thanks, and welcome back, Mark, or Mr. Geiger, sorry. How much of Skyview have you got completed to date?
We've got about 2 years yet to go, maybe 2.5. We've got a 7-acre parcel at the very end. So I'm really hoping once Skyview is done to keep going, but about 2.5 years, Mr. Flagel.
Okay. If you were to be included in this, and I mean, in the Phase 1, now you said you're part of the interim phasing in.
That's correct.
Can you explain that? And why you're not, can you just explain what you mean by that?
The interim was until this new policy was put in place, so we were allotted a certain amount of hectareages to develop up till the end of this year. But now with the new plan going forward, I wouldn't be able to develop at all until Phase 2.
If I could, if you had a shovel in the ground building one house, you wouldn't be here tonight, you'd be building, right? Is that sort of the easy, simple way of
Through you, Your Worship, not really, because the interim only gave us a certain amount of land.
Right.
To bring in all the off-sites, you need to have certainty of bigger land base than what I was given in the interim.
Okay, okay. That answered my question, and that's what I wanted to know. The commercial land that's part of, at the time, was called Skywood, or now McCarthy North. Is that something that the plan is, or have you dealt with this to sell this land to somebody else, or what's happening with, because you have X amount of hectarage only for land, for houses, residential, and then the other portion of the enclosement of McCarthy North is commercial. Have you dealt with anything on the commercial side?
We've been in talks with other developers that have a lot more expertise in the commercial end. So we were hoping if we could get the development up and running, the commercial component would be taken on by others.
Okay. Something about this, if I could, when would you be ready? If you got the go-ahead, when do you think, in your estimation, you would be able to start digging basements, I guess is the simplest way of putting it?
In my best estimate, I would say 2018 or 19.
Okay, so 2.5 years roughly.
Yeah.
But then that's bringing all the infrastructure work up to standards, getting everything all done prior to that, right?
Yes.
Okay. In your one development, you kind of limit the builders. Do you think that's inhibited you a little bit from further expansion, or is it better for you? And would you do the same if this ever happened, if you got to go into phase one here?
Through your worship, no, we never limited any
Okay.
builders. In fact, right off the bat, we opened it up to everybody,
So
even
you would-
individuals.
So you would do the same going forward?
Absolutely.
Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flager. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. Evening, Mr. Geiger. I have a couple of questions for you. If you don't mind, just setting aside your comments about McCarthy North and so on, and how you feel about that, could you comment for me, please, about the document that I'm going to consider tonight? Aside from that notion, are you pleased with what's here? Does this make sense to you?
There's a lot of people in this room that have a lot more expertise than I. I agreed with everything kind of what was being talked on. It was a lot higher level. A lot of it went over my head, I'll be honest.
Sure.
So I agreed, and I went along with everything else except the phasing.
Thank you very much. And my second question is, the lands that you're talking about, called McCarthy North, that you wish to develop, how many hectares is that?
It's the lands we own is 220 acres.
Okay, that's
sorry.
good. 220, yeah, that's good.
I'm still the old school, sorry.
Okay, no, that makes sense to me. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Other questions? Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery. We'll move on to our next delegation. This is Chad Jedlick. If you could identify yourself as well, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation as well.
Thank you. My name is Chad Jedlick, and I am the General Manager of Residential Land with Harvard Developments. I'm here to speak to the proposed phasing and financing plan. Harvard has been fully engaged on this matter throughout the consultation process. We've been advocates for the priorities of the Fiscal Community Plan, especially housing affordability and quality of life, because we feel those are essential to growth. Since the last executive meeting, we've met with the Development Community Administration on numerous times and have gained a better understanding of administration's rationale for wanting to set the phasing plan in advance of the master plans. First and foremost, we understand that administration needs to move forward with implementation of sanitary projects as well as water projects. On the sanitary side, it's necessary to become compliant with the Water Security Agency regulations that have come into place. Second, we also know that administration wants to focus on some other priorities, which are the implementation of the updates to the zoning bylaw, as well as focusing on infill development levies. Overall, we still maintain that, and I think everyone would agree that it would have been nice to have the infrastructure master plans at the start of this process, but we don't. And we've considered it long and hard in terms of administration's rationale for wanting to move forward. And in light of Council's request for industry to find consensus, we're prepared to accept the proposed plan that's before us. That said, I want to take a minute to address two concerns that we had just sort of in the last couple of weeks here. The first one was with regards to the new Water Security Agency regulations and the requirement that new developments store sanitary flows during a storm event. And it's something that, could have added millions of dollars to the development costs in West Terra. And we worked hard with administration over the last couple of weeks to find a solution that will basically allow us to mitigate those costs. And that's significant because it would have had an impact on housing affordability. So I want to thank administration for listening to that concern and working through it. Second concern relates to something that came up through budget, and that's the twinning of Dewdney. It's something that was originally part of the interim plan as a city commitment to fund that project, and we were under the understanding that it would go forward in the 2016 budget, but administration advised us that it was inadvertently omitted through the alignment of the phasing and financing plan and the 5-year capital plan, and something that will come forward in 2017. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the I guess I'll say necessary evils of this plan was the notion to defer transportation investment in order to focus funding on the sanitary and water. And we just think it's important to maintain a balance of that as we go forward, because a new growth area like West Terra doesn't have much burden or doesn't require much investment on the water and wastewater, but it does require transportation investment to ensure that it grows in a safe manner. So it also delivers a lot of benefit to West Regina residents that will be going out to the GTH and accessing the West Bypass. So it's something that, again, administration brought to our attention and provided some comfort that will be dealt with through the budget process next year. And so, again, we'd like to thank them for that. And it's something that we will be bringing forward next year because it is a key component of growth on the west side. So, in closing, we would like to acknowledge the significant time and resources invested in the phasing and financing plan by administration, by the development community, by our association, by the chamber. There were a number of people that were involved in this, and as well as by City Council. And I think that speaks volumes to the magnitude or to the magnitude of this investment. Sorry, the magnitude of this investment reflects how important this phasing and financing plan is to the city and how important growth is to the city. And it's something that we look forward to being a part of for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm sure there will be questions of members of council. Councilor Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Jedlick, for not only appearing tonight, but all the time and effort you put into the entire process, because it's certainly valuable. I just have a question. When developing a phasing financing plan, you build in a number of assumptions, and one of the assumptions we are trying to predict is sort of the rate of growth and the timing of growth, which is always challenging. Given the slowdown that's occurring, and we were at a point with some inventory, has that delayed your timelines in terms of moving forward on West Terra? Or is there, I guess, do you have to sell so many lots, or do you have to sell at a certain point before you actually begin your investments? I'm just trying to figure out a timeline here when all this is going to be happening, given kind of the current circumstances in the economy.
Through you, Mr. Worship, it's a good question. It's we'd actually hoped to have been servicing this fall. We did invest a fair amount of money in the site, and really where we're held up right now is entering into the servicing agreement with the city. And so our detailed design drawings were submitted in June, and they go through a review process, and we receive comments back and then resubmit, receive comments back, resubmit. And so it's going through that process, and we know that right now administration is very constrained in their time. They've had a lot of different things thrown at them this year from the school site to other items, and so it's kind of constrained their ability to review these, and so right now we're basically expecting our final comments back tomorrow, which would allow us to enter into a servicing agreement in short order. The challenge of developing in advance of that servicing agreement is that it's completely at our risk, and if we put pipes into the ground that all of a sudden aren't the right size, or that's at our risk. And so we've invested probably over $1 million in site work this fall to ensure that we're ready to go as soon as we can in the spring.
So from your perspective, the assumption around probably 1,000, 1,100 home starts a year is kind of still on track, that you're very comfortable that things will be moving at that sort of pace?
It's always tricky to predict. I mean, I think the latest stats in the market are actually probably better than what we were expecting. I don't think anyone in the industry anticipated that Regina would hit the 2,000 starts that CMHC predicted, and this was back in January, and we said that was a high prediction. We were thinking around 1,400 to 1,500 starts, and we'll be above that. So I think that's positive, but certainly there's it's just uncertain times. But as far as our builders go, they're committed, and we're ready to proceed.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Young, did you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Jedlick. One of the things that was something that you were interested in was area-specific rates, and that's not in this plan now, but I understand it might be talked about in the future. Could you just give us a brief explanation of area-specific rates?
Well, area-specific rates, there's, I guess, two ways to look at it. Once you have detailed understanding of the infrastructure required for the various growth areas, you can see which projects are required for growth in specific areas, and from there you can kind of put a cost of development to each area. And so by doing that work, it provides the opportunity to either phase growth in such a way that the more affordable or less costly areas are able to develop first, or you could look at differentiating rates. And the benefit to differentiated rates is that you could allow areas to go, and it would be based on sort of free market, that if an area could command a higher price per front foot or generate more revenue off lot sales, then it could also probably afford to pay that higher development levy. And so it's really more of a free market approach. Unfortunately, it's something that didn't get a lot of traction within the development community, and it's something that was proposed to be pushed back. But we think it is a way to, I think, ensure housing affordability. And so it's something that we were obviously disappointed not to see in this plan. But
And what are your expectations for reviews and for going forward? Do you expect to be involved in conversations on an annual basis or as things change?
Well, on an annual basis, as an industry, we review the project list, and the acknowledgement there is that if the projects are within sort of 5%, then the rates will simply be as contemplated in the report. I'm hopeful, and I think most in industry are hopeful, that as these placeholders are replaced with actual projects and detailed studies that indicate the true cost, that it might provide an opportunity for the rate to come down, hopefully. But it also might stoke the conversation again to look at things if the projects go sky high. I mean, it might force a reevaluation, but I guess we'll see as we go through the project list in future years.
Thank you, Mr. Jedlick.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor O'Donnell?
Thanks very much. Evening, Mr. Chadwick. There are people that are watching that don't understand what we're talking about, and there's all these lingo things, so you and I are going to break that down a little bit. I want to make sure that people understand, first of all, what we're talking about and why it's important. So you have a barren piece of land in the west side of the city called West Terra. What's the first thing you have to do as a developer to get that ready for development?
The first thing would be to go through the municipal approval process, which would be the overall neighborhood plan, which is a comprehensive plan for the entire development area, which looks at sort of all the all the influencing factors around the development site. As well, you put together a overall servicing strategy for the site that looks at transportation requirements, sanitary, water, stormwater requirements, and then from there you get into an urban plan design that really was, for our site, was really driven through the new OCP and the design requirements in there.
Okay, so let's talk about design, pipes in the ground, and roads. So you made reference when you were answering a question before about the size of pipe. Who determines the size of the pipe?
Our consulting engineers would, based on the design standard manual from the city. So the city creates a criteria that all developments have to achieve as you go in order to be eligible for development.
So the city would set a standard for pipes in the ground, width of the road, thickness of asphalt, where the sidewalks go, so on. Why does the city take an interest in that?
The city is the regulating authority, and really it's so that once the city inherits that subdivision, that it's going to function properly.
So that was the key thing I was trying to get at. So at the end of the day, you have a role and responsibility to develop in a certain style, but what follows is the city inherits or takes ownership over that. Is that correct?
Yes.
So so when you think of beyond your piece of dirt right now, and you look at the roads around it or the other peripheral things, why do you have a vested interest in that?
Really, it's to ensure that the community develops properly. We own the land within our subdivision area, within the limits of our parcel, and we, through the servicing agreement and development standards, we will construct all the infrastructure that's required inside that boundary. But then there's off-site improvements, such as the roads or the treatment capacity at the wastewater treatment plant, and that's where the SAFs go. That's where servicing agreement fees go. They pay for the off-site infrastructure, and so through our neighborhood plan, we did an assessment of not only what's within our boundaries, but also the road network outside of our boundaries, and then you put a capital plan in place that identifies at each stage of development what infrastructure is required. We can take care of the infrastructure that's required within our boundaries, and even now some of it that's required outside, such as our storm pond and the conveyance out to the creek, we're funding that completely even though it's outside of our boundary. And our lift station and the force main that runs up to the McCarthy mains, we fund that even though it's outside of our boundary. But the road is something that is funded through SAFs.
So your concern, using Dudney as the example, is that in your estimation, you want to make sure people flow easily, not only to your development, but beyond, and that would be your concern.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's different in this agreement that is before us for consideration is that you, as a developer, will be responsible for some things that used to fall under the service agreement fees. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they'll be solely funded by you. Can you give me an example of what one of those things would be? What's one of the changes?
It would be the two major ones are the lift station and for sanitary flows, and then as well a storm pond. And a third one would be the eventual construction of Courtney as it's realigned through the subdivision.
Thanks for that. You made a specific reference to this water agency and this change of standards. Could you, in a very simple way, tell me the impact that could have had on your development? And I'm assuming that this did not come at all from the City of Regina regulation, but was beyond, so provincial regulation.
So in summary, the Water Security Agency has, I'm not sure, requested or required the city to make improvements to avoid future discharges of sanitary flows into Wascana Creek.
Sure.
And so the city's undertaken an assessment of capacity in their network, and to Mr. Elliott's point, where he said we've got to use up that additional capacity or that remaining capacity, I think in order to meet these new standards, there really isn't any capacity. And because of that, our approved sort of servicing strategy was to flow our sanitary waste directly into the force mains and out to the wastewater treatment plant. In light of this new regulation, there's a requirement then for new developments to store that waste during a storm event so that we don't impact the other flows that are going already. What we worked with the city is to ensure that in the early stages that we're basically in a storm event able to disconnect from the city's system and store the waste in sort of an oversized capacity in our undergrounds and hold it until that storm event is gone. This is sort of a temporary solution until the city runs their third force main between the wastewater treatment plant and McCarthy, which is now necessary because of the WCA agreement. So when I mentioned earlier that we recognize that it's important that infrastructure projects be implemented, that's really a key one for us.
So if I could just give it back, that means that the standard of which we have to operate has changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Flagel.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Jedlick, and your father told me I should grill you, so I met him the other night again. So land of residential to commercial split on West Terra is how much?
There's the overall development is 490 acres. The residential component is about 70 acres.
70?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not at a half point or anything like that. The commercial side, I think, is a lot of interest to the DEP community, and you've had discussions with them. They're on side. They're all good about it. So having this development come on to their across the street will be a good thing. Is that sort of the gist from the last meeting we had?
Yes, through your worship. They've been very supportive of the development all the way through. I think that there's, it provides retail amenities out there. B, it provides new housing stock in the area. And 3, it also provides additional community, which we'd be hopeful that will allow for a reopening of the DEP Community School.
Right. So through you, Mr. Mayor, if right now you're allowed to do what, 40 acres, 40 hectares, 20 and 20?
Yes, through the interim plan, we were allowed to do a maximum of 40 hectares of residential, and the commercial component isn't controlled. And so our first phase of development is actually 54 hectares. And I'm not sure of the exact split, but it's probably about half and half. And
okay. So if I want to ask you this question because I want it out here. If this new recommendation came back and said, sorry, we're not going to allow you to develop your residential, even though we allowed you before, but today we're not going to, what would Harvard have done, and yourselves? And
through your worship, I think that would be a fairly troubling recommendation. We are, as Councillor Burnett inquired in terms of where development stage is, we are actually at a stage, I believe, where we would meet the requirements under the interim plan to enter into a servicing agreement this year, in the sense that all of our approvals are essentially there.
right, yeah. So, and I just wanted to throw that out there because when I said it, it kind of gave me like a, oh my God, what did I just say? But it's a fact. Somebody has been pulled away, and I'm talking about Mr. Geiger's lands, and we've had these discussions. If you're going to start building, when are you going to be ready to go? When are you going to dig a basement? I'll call it that.
The services will start as soon as we can in the late winter, early spring, and then builders will be starting to show homes this summer.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you,
That's what I
Councillor
needed to know.
Flagel.
Thanks.
Other questions? Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery.
Thank you.
And move on to next delegation, D15-113, Jason Carlston. Come forward and tell us who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions afterwards.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm Jason Carlston. I'm here with Evan Hunchak. We're of Dream Developments. So thanks for having us. So I'll open just by saying that Dream is here to provide our support of the new plan as proposed by the administration. a plan which was developed after additional consultation with the development industry. As the report notes, the new recommendations are broadly supported by the development industry and, of course, by your administration. As we indicated at the previous executive committee, we believe the process undertaken was sound with ample industry engagement, and this was demonstrated by the additional engagement sessions held beyond the original scope of the project and through changes that were made by the administration to the plan as a result of consultation, such as a phase-in of the rates and changes to the Endeavour policy. We also appreciate the additional engagement that Council directed to occur between the administration and industry towards seeking common ground, as this did result in positive resolution. In short, Council has managed to find a way to achieve consensus, maintain the financial integrity of the city, and strive to maintain the increase in costs to new homeowners through a phase-in of the rate. The plan delivers on City Council's request and desire for consensus and enables the implementation of the OCP. That's our short and brief. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Questions of the delegation? Councillor Dahl.
Thanks. Evening, gentlemen. Part of the what's before us is a 3-year phase-in. What does that do for you? What if it was 2 years? What if it was 5 years? So what if it was 1 year? I'm curious as to what's magic about 3?
Your Worship, I think 1 year wouldn't really be a phase-in, but I think what this does is attempt to mitigate the softness in the market right now. I think reference was made by Mr. Jedlick in terms of starts and forecasts to one of the questions. What we're seeing right now is an uptake of or a working down of the inventory. So, for example, Homes by Dream had quite a bit of inventory at the beginning of the year, but now we've submitted our first building permits in November and have worked our inventory down to the point that we need to. So I think there's a sort of a correction occurring in the market. We had overbuilt, both on the land side, we've oversold, and builders over-purchased lots, but I think we're finding a correction. So this phase-in allows for that to sort of settle into a new equilibrium. So there's a positive from that perspective, and it means that the impact on the end user, the new homeowner, is mitigated through the phase-in as well.
Thanks. I've heard some reference before you, but also I think in your submission as well, I think, that in fact you're starting to look at things that may happen in 2018, give or take, for some development. So does that mean that you take a long-term approach when you're doing a business plan?
Your Worship, absolutely, we certainly do. And in looking out over the next couple of years, like we look beyond that, we certainly have a 5-year business plan, and we look out 10 years when we're planning. And in terms of acquisitions, we're looking beyond 25 years to ensure that for the health of the business. But over the next couple of years, we've looked closely at that and think that we're going to take a much more deliberate approach to bringing land to the market, which is why we're accepting of these recommendations.
Thank you. So I just want to follow up on that a little bit. So when you're looking at the next 2 or 3 years, does the numbers that's before you, does the policy that's before you allow you to function in the city of Regina?
Your Worship, the policy will. It creates a certainty, creates an understanding amongst the industry of what our expected sort of obligations are going forward and the assumptions that are made regarding infrastructure. So it creates that clarity that we're seeking.
And I asked the previous delegation a little bit about water and the change of regulations. Do you sense any other change of regulations that you see in the foreseeable future that will impact you as a business?
Your Worship, to that, some changes at the provincial level are difficult to foresee too far into the future. We work very closely as an industry with the city regarding city standards and regulations. So we think we've made a lot of strides, so there's probably very few remaining to come forward.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Dahl. Other questions? I have one. The report before Executive Committee last month is different in some fundamental ways to the report that we're going to consider in a few moments. You approve both. So my question to you is the most important element for you certainty into the future, or is there something else that also is critical for your approval of the approach?
Your Worship, a good question. I think there are really two primary reasons why we support or accept these recommendations and the previous. I think we understood through the referral from council previously that we were seeking a common ground, one in which would see everyone move a little bit. So certainly recommendations might not be the most ideal as we would have written them, but coming together has some value as an industry, and coming together with the administration as industry is one of the reasons. And you cited the second reason, and that is it provides certainty, being able to plan to that and know what we're dealing with.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that. You can return to the gallery, and we'll move on to our last delegation, Jervin Weeks and Jason Pertunia. If you identify yourself, if you represent, you have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Pastor Weeks couldn't be here tonight. My name is Jason Petrunia. I work for Rosa Park Alliance Church. I'm a planning consultant with Planning Alliance. I'm pleased to stand here today before you on behalf of Rosa Park and to present our response to the city's proposed phasing and financing plan. The church, as you know, has been actively pursuing development of its lands, demonstrated most recently by meeting the provincial requirements for the servicing of the joint use school site. The church views this achievement as one step towards development of a social hub within Coopertown as a whole, in a collaborative manner with Dream and with the city. We view the recommendation before us as an outcome of a consultative process where the city asked for our views. From our perspective, the city has gone to the extent it can to accommodate these views and strike a balance between the various interests. For Rosewood, this means the inclusion of our 160 acres in the first phase of the phasing plan. We see this as supporting development in areas of the city that is the most cost-effective. And we also see the phasing plan as supportive of complete communities. Within Coopertown as a whole, the social hub, located primarily in Rosa Park, in the Rosa Park neighborhood, is ideally located to the future transit hub, retail center, and Elmbridge neighborhood. As discussed previously with the executive committee, we believe that there is symmetry to be gained in a staged approach to developing Coopertown that builds out service-oriented anchor components at the same time as the residential component. This will ensure access to local and regional services within the newly emerging neighborhoods, as well as in existing neighborhoods within Northwest Regina. The school site is a great example of this effort, where the service will be in place, ready to serve new residents as they move into the neighborhood, while also serving existing residents in the Northwest. As you will see in the report, Rosewood also supports the proposed SAF rates. Understanding that rates never go down, we also look forward to the review of capital projects and the opportunity to continue the dialogue with the city on the investment necessary to support and facilitate growth of the city. To close, we acknowledge the hard work of administration preparing this recommendation and applaud the efforts of council and administration to reach a solution based on compromise. We look forward to continuing to work with the city in building Regina's communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there questions of the delegation? Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. Thanks for coming forward. You're building the school, and that's part of Rosewood. There was also I never heard mentioned today, low-income housing, seniors complex, seniors care facility, sports complex, et cetera, et cetera. But you did mention new residents moving in. Where are they moving into? In Rosewood.
Right. Well, once we have our plan in place and we have approvals in place, we'll be beginning with the remainder of the Stage 1 development of Rosewood, which will be surrounding the school site.
So I guess that was my question as well, Mr. Mayor, is that portion of the plan has not gotten forgotten, been forgotten because of the school site only?
No. Through your worship, we've submitted the neighborhood plan and the concept plan for Rosa Park Alliance Church. So that's for the Rosa Park lands. So that's before administration currently.
Okay. Am I correct in saying that the original housing, low income, was all part of the SAF fees prior to this new plan?
Yeah, the affordable housing. I mean, it was part. It's still part. It was part of the vision then, and it's still part of the vision today.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Other questions? Thank you very much. You were very clear in your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to now consider reports before us. Now, for members of the gallery who are in the gallery, just to explain what's going to happen here, we have 3 reports before us. One is an information item which outlines the discussions with the development community after reference from the executive committee. The second report is a table report, CR 15-138, which is a table executive committee meeting. And the third report is the city manager's report 15-114. That is the report we'll consider tonight with the changes. So I'd ask for a motion to receive and file report IR 1524 and 138.
I'll move that.
Seconder.
I'll second the report, Your Worship.
Now, in doing this, we won't be curbing debate. This actually is giving a context for that report. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We move on to City Manager's Report 15-14. If I could have someone to move that. Councillor O'Donnell, you were standing up. Okay. Do you want to speak to it? Seconder for it? Councillor Murray. Speakers to the report. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. So it may be wise if we just talk this through a little bit. I think some of the things from the delegation came through, but so if I could maybe ask the administration first, just give me a concise notion as perhaps what's changed from what we were talking about before.
Actually, that's right. I was going to, Ms. Horlock, I was going to ask you to do that.
Yes.
Summary, please, would be helpful.
Through your worship. So since being here at Executive on November 4th, we met with the development industry 3 times to discuss the policy and rates and the things that Council had brought forward at that meeting. We utilized a consensus finding process gauging the group's level of support for each particular option or recommendation. The highlights of the outcomes of the discussion are we had unanimous support with Appendix C in your supplementary report, which was the areas of common ground. We agreed to increase the endeavor to assist from 15 years to 20 years. We agreed to the SAF and the development levy policies in the transition period, and the continued annual review of the rates and the project list. We also had a majority of support regarding setting the phasing plan ahead of the master plans so that the phasing will actually inform the master plans as we move forward. We had majority of consensus that the area-specific rates will be considered during the next major review in 5 years, and that the revised phasing plan, which adjusted Elmbridge to start in 2018 in Phase 1, was agreed to. We also agreed to a differentiated rate between the 235 and the 300 lands, and that the approval of the rates would be for 3 years, and that at the end of the 3 years we'll have one unified rate. We agreed that when we went through the project list, there was general consensus regarding the project list, which is approximately $1.4 billion. And we discussed with the policies that were agreed to that approximately $820 million are funded by the developers through the SAFs. Approximately $345 million is directly funded by the developers, and that approximately $210 million is funded from the taxpayers. That's the basis for growth pays for growth. Projects that are only required for growth are to be paid for the developers either through the SAF or through the developer directly funded. Projects where are required for growth, but there's opportunities to address service deficiencies or to existing residents, or to provide a new service that is not currently offered to existing residents. A portion of that project and upgrade would be assigned to the taxpayers or the utility. So that is, in a nutshell, what we came to agreement on at our meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Harlock. That's great.
Thank you. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. One of them is that you stand before us with a clear understanding that the people in the development community are supportive of the notions that are before us, and you are comfortable with them as well?
Ms. Harlock?
Through your worship, I very much am happy with the way we got to our consensus. Both sides listened to each other's concerns, and we got to a point where we were able to take all of our views and come up with this recommendation that is generally supported by all.
Thank you very much. My last question, I'll close debate later, but my last question is what happens next? So if council says, okay, we're good with this, what happens next? What does that mean?
Ms. Harlock?
Through your worship, I'll be very happy. That's the first thing. And I'm sure a lot of the development community will be also, because it will give the needed certainty as we move forward. But some of the next key steps is that, as per the recommendations, we do need to do some more work with regards to the infill rate. So one of the recommendations is that we will look at that next year and bring forward to council a new infill rate. And then the other recommendation is that we will look at the industrial rate and do some work around that, and we'll bring it forward to council in 2017.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnell. Other speakers to the report? Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. I'm generally happy with this. The only thing that, and I've voiced my concern about this already, is the elimination or the delay of North McCarthy, or what was called Skywood, through the school site process. Part of the reason I'm not happy with this is because we're sort of, and it's been said out here today, is that we're telling the developers and we're telling the residents of Regina that we're not going to let you live in that area just because we don't want to, and we're going to tell you got to go live in Skyview and West Hill or Edgewater, Harbor Landing, Greens, et cetera, et cetera. I guess my point to part of this is that 7 years ago, if we would have done the same thing, when you think of all the development that was going on, Greens on Gardner wouldn't have happened if we'd have said, sorry, Lauren, you can't build because we're going to make sure we fill all the other lands first. The other one that comes to point is Lake Ridge Addition. The city was going crazy. Everything was going good. Dream came to the city and said, or Dundee at that time came to the city and said, hey, we've got a piece of land here that we can develop. A year and a half later, there was over 450 doors put into that land. We could have said no based on what we're saying here to Mr. Geiger tonight. You also have the development of no commercial buildings north of the new hotel that's going in there, because according to one of the developers that owns some land there, if there's not more housing going in, we're not going to have the numbers to put the stores and facilities, et cetera, in there. There's also talk of taking Diefenbaker all the way through to Courtney. We don't need it then. That hampers Maple Ridge. That hampers Skyview. That hampers exiting out of Rosewood. That hampers a lot of development. It also hampers, and from the administration, what they're telling us is that there's not enough population growth to have exits off and on Pasco Street like some of the other areas have, because there's more development. This is going to hamper all the growth going up there. There are, I'm not sure how many hectares of commercial land within the North McCarthy that won't happen. There's also land north of where that ugly Quonset is sitting that has been an eyesore since 1960, I think. That's still going to sit there. We need to get rid of that, but nobody's going to build up there. Then you cross Pasco Street and you have 90 hectares of city commercial land that is going to sit and continue to sit because we are not allowing the north part of the city to grow. We've been told, I've been told by our administration, that road networks are not going to happen up there until we get more population. Well, this is what we've just said. We're not going to allow another 12 or 1,500 people to live up here until Phase 1 is done. That's the biggest thing, and we have to remember that, because we're looking at, when you think about Wascana Creeks, Harbor Landing, all of the new subdivisions that have gone on, if we'd have sat here as a council and told the city of Regina, the residents of Regina, sorry, you can't build in Wascana because we decided to change it. We should not be deciding where people want to live. If a developer, along with Mr. Geiger, want to do Skywood, McCarthy North, whatever we want to call it, let them do it. It's their nickel. If they want to put 80 houses up there, Mr. Jagelniski started Kensington. We shut him down simply because of safety reasons and low pressure. He's now back up in business. He's getting it going again. It's taking a while. I think we're looking at a slower market, and that's driving some of this. But if it ever picks up, then we're going to be wanting the Mr. Geigers and the different other interests to bring forward land so we can sell it. So I'm going to bring an amendment forward after, I'll let everybody speak, but that we re-engage Mr. Geiger's land into Phase 1 and let the people of the city of Regina and surrounding areas decide if they want to live there or not. It's his nickel to build it. It's going to be ours to maintain it, yes, but down the road, it's going to be a great project for the north part of the city. Thanks. And I don't want to bring that forward right now. I'll let everybody speak first.
Councilor Flegel, you only have one time to speak.
Okay, well, then I'm going to bring the amendment forward now then, in that I would like to see Phase 1 include, I guess as we're calling it, North McCarthy Boulevard, residential, commercial, the land that I know as Skywood, I guess, into Phase 1. So we'll call it McCarthy North. I think that's what administration is calling it, I think.
That's
right?
what it's referred to.
Referred to, yeah.
Okay, a seconder for that? Second, okay, you're on the floor, okay.
For all the reasons that I've just talked about, this is why the amendment is, I'm bringing it forward, because I think we shouldn't be the ones deciding, and especially when Lake Ridge Addition was just done, and within a year and a half, 450 new doors were put in there. I think it was the right decision at that time, and I think Dream would have agreed with it at that time as well, so I'll leave it on the floor.
Okay, Councilor Fraser.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor, and thanks to Councilor Flegel for bringing this forward. I rise to speak against this, actually. I think it absolutely is our job to decide where people live and where new neighborhoods go, and we have to do that in a smart and planned way. I think that is our obligation. Ultimately, we also need to keep in mind that there's a lot of factors that decide how quickly Regina grows, but right now, amount of new neighborhoods is absolutely 100% not the bottleneck. You know, it has to do about resource prices, it has to do about prime interest rate, it has to do definitely about immigration policy. It really is not being held up by a number of new neighborhoods. We have a ton of new neighborhoods in Regina right now. And I think a lot of hard work has been put into this, and I think it's unfortunate for Mr. Geiger. He's a great person, I'm sure, and he does great work, but I think there's a phasing piece of this that's important for taxpayers, and I think we should stick to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Fraser. Other speakers to the amendment? Councilor Bryce?
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the administration, have you looked at this land, and why was it taken out?
Ms. Horlock?
Your Worship, it was land that we did look at. Currently, Mr. Geiger doesn't have any approvals in place. Our main concerns is that we want to have a phasing plan that allows neighborhoods that are in the Phase 1 to be able to build out in a quicker way in order to maximize our capital infrastructure investments. Not only that, but it's also to manage our ongoing operating and maintenance costs, because we want more taxpayers to come online to support that area. So if it takes longer to build these areas out, then that has an effect on our long-term investments and our cash flows, because we'll be looking at putting in more infrastructure across the whole city instead of focusing it. So at this point, with the school site moving over, our priorities changed, and we feel that our best way to maximize our investments is the phasing plan that we are putting forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Other speakers to the amendment? We're all clear. It's actually on the screen. Councilor Flegel, you okay with the wording of that motion? Call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. We'll go back to our speakers on the list to the main motion. Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. There was a few delegations, and I think there were some questions in that. One was, will this bind the council's hands into the future?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your worship, at this point, are you referring specifically about the rates, or? Yeah. So with the rates, at any time, council could come forward and request that the rates be reviewed. I think our recommendation is such that we would like the certainty of knowing that the rates are approved for the 3 years. We do have the recommendation that if there's a variance by 5%, we would bring it back. But at any time, council could ask for it to come forward. But our recommendation is the approval of the 3 years for more certainty for all parties involved.
Thank you so much. Through you, Mr. Mayor. How have we ensured this dollar amount is enough to actually provide for the services that are required, that we don't end up with a deficit?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your worship, we have a very comprehensive model, and that's why we review the project list on an annual basis, because new information will come in, and we'll use that information to adjust the model and to look at those projects. The model's set up to zero out at the end of the 25 years, so there is going to be peaks and valleys where we'll be in a surplus situation and where we'll be in a deficit, but at the end of the 25 years it is to zero out. So we make the adjustments as we move on throughout the years, looking at the project list and adjusting the fees accordingly.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. How long have we been talking about service agreement fees in order to get feedback from the community and the as a whole and the development community?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your worship, it has been a few years because we had the interim, which we worked with the development community for the interim, but for this project specifically, we started approximately last October working with the development community to garner feedback to where we are today.
You should actually go back to 2007.
Yeah, it's been around for
That's
a while.
right.
For sure. I'm in agreement with the recommendations that have been brought forward. I think that I'm happy to see that the development community and administration have come together to actually find something that works for the taxpayers of Regina as well as the development community. So I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Hawkins?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I appreciate the efforts made by the development community and by the administration to work through a process to reach a consensus on this matter, and particularly to reach an agreement that balances the various interests at stake here. I also think it's important to say that in saying that, Council looks at this from the point of view of what is in the best interests of the entire community, and I think that having done that, this agreement is in our best interests as a community. I'm particularly appreciative of the fact that, of Ms. Horlock's last answer, with respect to the fact that there's nothing in this agreement which fetters Council at any point at Council's will from reviewing any aspect of this agreement if circumstances change to warrant such a review. I have one specific question for the administration. You've dealt with, you've heard the pros and cons of various specific fees and have undertaken to review those at the same time that the agreement is reviewed, I believe within a 5-year time frame. I just want to ask what kinds of considerations will you be taking into account, will you be looking at when you go to do that review of area-specific fees?
Ms. Horlock?
To your worship, there'll be a number of factors that we look at because each set of infrastructure has its own unique aspects. So we'll be looking at how those costs would be allocated to the different areas, and we'll be working very closely with the development industry and coming up with the parameters on how we would apply the formulas to allocate that infrastructure to each area.
Would it be fair, Your Worship, would it be fair to say that that review will be informed by your experience under this current agreement over the next several years, and by the completion of the plans, the water and wastewater plans that will be completed before you shortly?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship. That's right. The master plans will provide us another layer of information that will come into play as we're having those discussions with the development community on how to look at whether or not an area-specific rate is something that we want to proceed with.
Thank you very much. I'll be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Young?
Thank you, Your Worship. Part of the stakeholder feedback talks about tolerance for a deficit in the SAF reserves, and but it says that even though that may happen, you're working toward the lowest possible deficit. If we receive infrastructure funds from either the federal or the provincial government, will that affect that SAF reserve?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your worship, definitely there'll be impacts to the projects and to the costs of the projects, because as we get infrastructure dollars from different levels of government, that gets applied to the top, the top of the project, which will reduce the contributions on either party, which could affect the rates.
Okay, thank you. Back when we talked about this at Executive Committee, we gave the industry and the administration a tall order to try to find consensus on this. And you engaged in a process that is a little bit different from the usual democratic process of just putting something forward and having a vote, and the most vote wins. This alternative process to work toward consensus takes a lot of time, and I understand you had 3 meetings and some of them lasted all day, so it was quite an investment of time and energy. But what you came out with is something that people have voiced different ways of saying it, but it strikes a balance. It's in the best interests of the whole, and everyone's been heard. So congratulations to both the industry and to the administration for taking the time to come up with something that everyone's clear about and that will go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, would like to acknowledge all the time and effort that the development community and our staff have put into this process. That I know just reading through the complexity of the document is very challenging. And I guess one of the things that I've been most impressed since coming on council is kind of this strategic approach the city has tried to take in terms of dealing with this, I guess, unprecedented growth spurt we've gone through in the last 10 years. That I know when we first got elected 3.5 years ago, there was an issue we couldn't even have. We had no more land, and the panic and the rush to try to get the current OCP approved, and that was a very high level arching. And now we're into the next layer, which is not only the service agreement fees, but as referenced, there is the master plans. And I guess in a perfect world, it would have been nice to have all our master plans, but again, I kind of like the reference that part of this process was to find some common ground so we could move forward. And unfortunately, sometimes I guess they work in parallel. But I do think the real value of the process, or some of the value, was certainly just a greater understanding that I think both the city now has and the development community of everybody's issues. That I think understanding the pressures of our renewal issues that we've got in the system in terms of plugging these new neighborhoods into the existing projects. We've got the issues of growth and all the pressures new growth is putting on. And to me, one of the biggest worries is always our own financial capacity within the city of what we can actually handle at any one time. And I know anybody watching, we're trying to push the envelope on all fronts, everything from raising taxes to a tolerable level to our debt load right now. We're trying our best at every corner to lobby for higher levels of government funding through grants and that. And service agreement fees is certainly something else on the radar screen that we're constantly looking at how we can build. That I think from looking at everything that's been put in, I think there has to be, and there is a recognition that we're building this model on certain assumptions, and ones being, the rate of growth, our competitiveness across the country. We seem to be kind of in the middle, which I guess is a safe zone. It's kind of the sweet spot. We've got that whole uncertainty around what the federal government's going to do. There's lots of promises that they want to focus on municipal. So I think, in my mind, that long as we leave that door open, that is better information, more information comes in, that we do have that flexibility, and we always do have that authority as council to revisit. But I do believe that through all this hard work, that I think we have reached a point of some common ground, and I think it's time that we can move forward on this file, and hopefully can. I think because of that, I'd like to put my support behind the recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Other speakers to the report? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Thanks a lot for everyone who's been involved in this process. I think this is certainly among the most important decisions that this council will face. A question for administration. A report recently out of Calgary suggests that a new house in Calgary Greenfield might take 8 years to start paying for itself, quote unquote, for city services. Do we have any sense of, once this new number is fully in place, once we hit 2018, what will be the case here? How long will it take for a new house built in a suburb in Regina to be in the black, so to speak?
Ms. Horlock, you want to try that one? You have a crystal ball?
Yeah, through your worship, I actually don't have that information at hand. I might ask if no, I'm getting head shakes. So
okay.
We haven't done those calculations to provide you an answer tonight.
Okay, no problem. Could you just speak to a brief history of this number? I mean, we know where it is today and where it's going to be over the next 3 years, but could you just put it in the context of what the rate has been in, say, the last 10 years or so? the per hectare rate as best as you can guess?
Through your worship, I might give that to Ms. Lugner to go through the history of all of the different rates that we've had.
Ms. Lugner?
Through you, your worship, as you referred to earlier, 2007 was the last time we had a major review of our servicing agreement fee policy. Prior to that, the rate was around $87,000 per hectare. And in 2007, it more than doubled. It went up to around 180-some thousand per hectare. And then since then, until the interim period, it went up primarily by the cost of inflation. And through the interim period, we made another major change to the policy, and then what you have before you today.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'll just, my closing statement, I'll just like to say that in 3 years in council, I'm constantly reminded that the city has very little control over how quickly we grow, I think, and actually the same sort of goes for the development community. We react to the state of the broader economy, again, things like resource prices, immigration policy, prime interest rate, and it's ultimately our job to decide where that's, where those new people fit in. We certainly, when we talk about densifying a community, there's a right pace to do it. If it happens too quickly, we want to run into problems, and if we don't do it quick enough, we run into other problems. I represent the downtown, a couple downtown neighborhoods, 3 downtown neighborhoods, mostly in Regina, and it's important for us to keep in mind that those neighborhoods have actually hollowed out in recent years. There's about 35% less people living in a neighborhood like Cathedral than there was about 40 years ago. So it's important to remember that as we try to bring people into existing city footprint, it's really a question of catching up to where things used to be. It's not something really beyond that. We're playing catch up. So I feel like this is actually our ultimate lever in how to make sure that new growth happens in a good way, in a way that makes neighborhoods vibrant, makes libraries have populations that can keep them full, makes parks have enough people living nearby that can keep parks full and support things like outdoor pools and that sort of thing. So I think this has been a very hard job. I'm glad to hear that there's mostly some consensus in the development community. I think this is going to be an important step forward for Regina. So thanks for everyone's hard work, and I look forward to supporting this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flegel. Other speakers? Councillor O'Donnell, can you take the chair, please?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to begin by thanking the administration and many of the people in the gallery for bringing this consensus forward. Through Diana Horlick and Shane Lugner and other staff who have done a fantastic job of bringing this to a conclusion. This is, in my view, a very important element for us. It's a landmark decision, and this council seems to be filled with landmarks, from the pension plan to the wastewater treatment plant. We have these big issues that we see when we knock them down and we resolve them. This is another resolution to that. So to the staff, thank you very much. To the leadership of those in the gallery tonight, thank you as well for seeing the big picture, for seeing the need for consensus. It is an uneasy consensus. It is an uneasy agreement. We have heard that. There are elements that are agitating and of concern. But on the bigger picture, we have agreement, and that is going to stand us in very good stead for our city into the future. I mean, this really is a building block for the future, literally. This is the foundation for growth for the next 25 years. I have a couple questions of the administration. Just to explain in more detail, we have the concept of growth paying for growth, both in the OCP, and now we have it in a document that has been agreed to. The city will also be paying for it. That's to say taxpayers. We're funding a portion of the $1.4 billion investment over the next 25 years. And I think it's about $210 million. In the concept, within the concept of growth paying for growth, what exactly is current taxpayers, paying for in this overall package?
Mr. Chairman, so the $210 million within this infrastructure are projects that are required for growth, but also address a service deficiency for existing residents, or a new service that's not currently offered. So it provides existing residents with some new infrastructure that's going to benefit them, and that's why there's that percentage allocated to those projects from taxpayers.
Excellent. So this is truly growth paying for growth, and taxpayers pay for those benefits that they directly benefit from. Mr. Chair, I want to make an amendment, if I could, and I want to make reference to recommendation number 12, just to be clear. It's a small amendment, but actually it's also big. It speaks to the issue of industrial development in Regina in the future, and I think the word subsidy may be in the wrong context, and likely the word policy should be there instead of that. So I have a seconder for that. I'd like to make an amendment to remove the word subsidy and in its place policy.
Councillor Young, thank you.
I think it's self-evident what we're trying to achieve. It's a new policy. It is not a subsidy. That may be something we talk about, but as an objective of this council, it is not to provide subsidies. It's to provide a policy that's clear and cost-effective and transparent. So if I have a vote on that, Mr. Chair, I have no further comment on it. It's pretty self-explanatory.
I'll let the clerk just put it up first so everybody can see it. I don't think it's difficult, but take your time. Are you good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, thanks. So call the question. All in favor? Opposed or none? That's unanimous.
But, thank you for that. Just some other closing comments on this. With respect to how federal funding and infrastructure will affect the number and the order of projects, I know this is hard to answer, but we have thought about that. The administration, through you, Mr. Chair, has thought about the potential impact of federal infrastructure monies, which, if we're to believe what's being said during the election, is about twice as much money as what was under the previous government. To the administration, is that in the mix of how we're thinking about what's happening now in the future and how that could impact rates in the future?
Through Mr. Chairman, that's correct. As we move forward and we understand more about any dollars that are coming in, we'll take that into consideration with respect to our project list and timing of projects, and also with respect to how that impacts the rates.
Other two quick comments. Note that the fourth recommendation speaks to rates for the 235 and 300,000 population. That is a very different model than what we saw from last time. And that shows one element. The other one would be the endeavor to assist to 20 years from 15. Shows the administration and this council has listened to what was said by the development community. There are many other facets in this one here. I only have a few minutes to speak, but I will close by saying that I'm extremely proud of this administration, this council, and the city for moving forward on a very complex issue that has been before us in many different forms since 2007. Thanks to everyone here, and I hope we have support for this one. Thank you. Councillor O'Donnell to close debate.
Thanks very much. I want to just summarize a little bit about a couple of things that I heard or didn't hear. So the tone of the discussion on the floor of council, both from council but from our delegations, is quite different than it was at the executive committee. What I heard clearly today was a desire from those who are involved in the land development industry to invest in our city. Two, I think that they accepted, and I think this is profound actually, they accepted not only a service agreement rate, but also that they would accept responsibility for some other things. And one of our delegations accepted or gave you examples of what goes on within a development that will be solely their responsibility financially. I think that's huge. I think that the 3 years of stability is important for all concerned. We all have to plan long term. We all have to know what's coming. And I think in particular when it comes to growing a city. And by the way, this is a clear statement that growth is important to our city, to our council, and to the people that we serve. This is about growth. And so 3 years of stability allows you to function and allows us to function and do what we have to do. I think there's some consistency here as well. The endeavor to assist was one of those concepts that I needed to get my head around. First of all, I thought it was logical from the get-go. Maybe it wasn't. But to extend it to 20 years is consistent with the plan that the OCP lays out as to how long it's going to take to grow our city to the numbers that are there. So there is consistency. I am concerned about two things. And it's not about the agreements before us, but it's what's not before us. The infill notion is of great concern to me. We have spent time in the last while incenting infill, but we also know that we're on the verge of some very large infill projects. Each of those has a great impact on our services, and we have to look at that differently. If anything we walk away from here in the next year, when we get a report back, this is the one that I think is highly sensitive. We have lots of things we want to do, and how we pull that off will be interesting to me. And the second one is on the industrial land. I appreciate the recommendation that went forward about getting rid of the word subsidy. But we all know that we need jobs. With jobs comes growth. With jobs comes houses, and so on and so on. And it's this whole notion of jobs and in industrial areas that we need to play with a lot. So I will also look forward to that. And that one also concerns me because around us there are a number of things that are going on in terms of hope and desire for industrial growth. It's not just us. But I finish with this. It seems that we have a city that people want to live in and invest in. I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councilor O'Donnell. That closes debate. I'll call the question on the report before us. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Motion to adjourn. Bylaws, yes. We don't have the bylaws. All that we did was for nothing. Councilor O'Donnell, go ahead.
Thank you. I move, seconded by Councilor Hawkins, that bylaws number 2015-75 and 76 be introduced and read a first time.
Mr. Clerk.
Council has completed its consideration of this report and will now consider the following bylaws to provide for their implementation. 215-75 respecting development levy agreements and related calculations of development levy fees on or after January 1st, 2016, and number 215-76 respecting amendments to Design Regina, the official community plan bylaw to adopt the phasing and financing plan and related policies. If there's anyone in the gallery who wishes to address council at this time, I would ask you to indicate so. There is no one, Your Worship.
I'll call the vote on first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councilor Burnett, the bylaws 2015-75 and 76 be read a second time.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councilor Bryce, the council hereby consents to bylaws 2015-75 and 76 going to third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? We will wait to our next meeting of council before we consider the bylaws. Now we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconder, Councilor Murray. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening.